Well, it's my great pleasure to introduce today my friend and collaborator, a true humanist, Uvius Monticulus, or as some of you may know him, Uwe Springmann. Uwe has degrees in physics, economics, astronomy. He's worked as a professional developer. He has an advanced degree in Latin, and he is a representative of a new synthesis of intellectual skills and really demonstrates one model in the very rich set of models that we have within what we now call the digital humanities. Uwe is also one of a group of people who really, I think collectively would deserve a Nobel Prize for the study of Greco-Roman antiquity if such a thing were awarded, because of their selfless and dynamic and collaborative work to improve our ability to extract Greek and Latin from the printed record, which is an absolutely critical skill and a skill upon which all of our subsequent analysis depends. And Uwe is going to talk about work that really transforms the intellectual questions that we can pose of the immense body of early modern books that have been digitized and put within reach of society as a whole. So, Uwe?
Yeah, Greg, thank you very much for your kind words. No, I'm glad that you can't see me, otherwise you would see me blush because of the remarks you just made. I just want to stress that I'm one of the people who are glad and happy to work with you and trying to uncover our classical roots for a new century. And I will relate some of the recent progress that has been made in getting our printed heritage into the electronic age. So the talk is about OCR methods. I guess you are all familiar with what OCR means, optical character recognition. The idea that if you have a printed page, which hitherto you could just read by a pair of eyeballs with a brain attached to it, maybe a computer can read it as well and automatically extract the meaning of the letters, the meaning of the words, and transport all this old stuff that was printed over 400 to 500 years now into the electronic age. Actually, OCR is not as recent nor as old as you might think. It was invented at the beginning of the 20th century by a British with French surname Fournier d'Albe. It's called optophone. That was a reading device for the blind. It essentially was the same incentive that led Ray Kurzweil, who is still alive, to invent his reading machine, and together with it, two other technologies, the scanner and the OCR workflow. This is, of course, very important today in modern business. When you look at all these invoices going around, all these catalogs, and you want to have a paperless office, but we want to use it also for the much more valuable printed history of our past, although that is much less. I guess what has been printed the first 50 years in printing history from 1450 to 1500, the incunabulum period, that's about, must be something like the month or even the production of within a single week of today's printed output. So maybe you have already experimented with some of the leading commercial available products, such as Abbey Fine Reader, and there are also two other companies still alive today. One is Nuance with the OmniPage product, and the third is Read Iris by Canon. All the other early products have been merged into one of these three companies. But for 10 years now, there happens to be a good open source software available. One goes under the name of Tesseract. That's by a development effort led by Ray Smith, once at HP, who is now with Google. And the other one is Octopus, led by Tom Broyle, who is also now with Google. And Google has an obvious reason to make this to bring this technology into the public domain, because then it can serve you hits, search hits, looking into publications that nobody else can. So what is OCR research then about? It used to be very much proprietary technology with many hundreds of years of developers into it. So the most you could do as a university researcher is get the products and try it out and live with the output. Correct it if you can, and if you can't, you're just lost. Generally, it has been assumed that OCR is a solved problem because it gives very good results for modern printings, that is printings from the 20th and 21st century, with very good background to noise resolution. You have clear, crisp images on a uniformly white background. That's not so the case with more historical printings, as we all know, because there you also have strange scripts like Gothic scripts, also called Fraktur. You have non-Latin alphabets. Perhaps the most important for us classicists is the Greek alphabet, but also classical Arabic. You have unusual glyphs, complex layouts, and of course the book and the pages have been degraded both from usage and age. So most academic research has been on OCR post-processing. Whatever comes out of the application of a commercial engine has been post-processed in order to yield better understandable words and correct the obvious errors. There has been a renewed interest in OCR, especially for historical printings, and that is a direct consequence of all these digitization efforts. If we recall, digitization here does not mean the complete conversion of printed pages into electronically manageable texts, but just the scanning. So you convert images of pages into just pictures that you can look at. That's already a big progress, but of course nobody can hope to be able to read all this or find anything in it. So Google hopes to scan 130 million books until 2020, and there are big libraries as well, and one of the largest ones is the Bavarian State Library, BSB, here in Munich, where I'm based, and they have very good scans as well as other large collections that come from Princeton and Harvard and go into HathiTrust. You know all about that. Now, the long-term goal of all these institutions is now they have collected all these images, but its use is somewhat limited. Can't we just do a automatic bulk conversion into electronic text as well? And that, of course, must be automatic, because it's inconceivable that even millions of Chinese or whoever transcribe them over the course of I don't know how many years. Our only hope here is in a machine approach. And the big problem now is that the current methods do not work very well for this kind of material. There has even been an European project under the name of Impact, running from the years 2008 to 2012, the output of which you can look at under this link, www.digitization.eu. Unfortunately, it's also a bit restricted because it only looked at post-processing, and it left completely alone the much bigger problem of how to get the images into text in the first place. We have our own group at the University of Munich, that is Professor Schulz, with whom I'm closely collaborating, and then there are other projects in the world as well, and one I'm closely connected with, as most of you, I guess, is the Open Greek and Latin project at Leipzig at Tufts. That's Greg Crane and all the others who happen to collaborate with him. So we have to look at some of the concepts of OCR first. If you get these infamous OCR errors, they all can be thought of as being made up of three elementary edit operations. There are misspelled characters. You can view them as substitutions. The correct character has been substituted for a wrong one. There are spurious symbols which haven't been on the page, but they show up as some kind of character. These are called insertions of new symbols. And some text is also going to be missed. These are deletions. I give you three examples. One is something which has been misrecognized. You see this word exercised with this long S that was in use until the 18th century or so. And in the modern Latin alphabet, the letter that comes close to it in shape is the F. So if you look in the Google Ngram viewer and look for certain words presumably spelled with an S, you may not find them, but will find an F instead. So if you look for presumably, you get hits until, I don't know, 1850. And before, there was no such word, but instead you find presumably. This is well known now, this long S. So this can be viewed as a substitution. Or something like an I and an N. It has three legs, and if the dot on the I gets somewhat blurred, then it might be recognized as an M. This can be viewed as a deletion of the I, followed by a substitution of N to M. And then there are splits as well, like in having. Now you get two words with a blank in between. This is also very bad because now you can't even find this word having because it has a split in between. So all the errors that come up in OCR output can be viewed as one of these three special cases. There are three other concepts I would like to introduce before we go forward, because then I will be able to talk in these terms about the output quality. One is the Liebenstein distance. That was a Russian mathematician who defined something like the minimum number of edit operations, the operations we just talked about, insertions, substitutions, and deletions, to convert one string into another one. Here's an example. You have the word earnest, and what is the minimum amount of operations you can bring this to Nester? There are several possibilities. One is you delete E and R at the beginning. That's two operations, and you insert E and R at the end. Again, two operations. In total, this is four operations. Instead, you could take every one of the six symbols and replace it by the correct one, but that would be larger. So the Liebenstein distance is the minimum distance, the minimum number of edit operations you need to convert one string to the other. This is important for correcting OCR output. Now you have this distance. You can also define the error rate. This is just the ratio of errors to the total number of entities. For instance, if you have a page full of text and you do an OCR on it, you come up with so many correct symbols and so many incorrect, whatever kind there are. Then you can define an error rate by the number of incorrectly recognized characters divided by the total number of characters. That goes by the name of character error rate, CER, and in the same manner you could also define a word error rate, WER. Here we are more concerned with the character error rate. And what's then the accuracy? That's just the complement of the error rate. It's 1 minus the error rate in percentage. So for instance, if you have something like 98% character accuracy, that means there are 2% wrongly recognized characters. And for a page of about, let's say, 1,000 to 2,000 characters, it still means you have 20 to 40 errors on a page. So that would be unacceptable if you handed in a paper to get printed, of course. But if you have a historical text, that is really pretty good, as we will see shortly. So I would like to introduce the topic of historical OCR, just a short description. It doesn't mean the OCR as done in historical times by the Greeks and Romans, but of course the OCR of historical documents. And unfortunately, is further restriction. It's only printed documents for the time being. Of course, everybody looks after manuscripts and wants to get converted all the manuscripts we have from the Middle Ages. But this is an even harder problem than the OCR of printed material. So at the moment, we look at 1450, the invention of Gutenberg of movable letter printing, and not farther. I should also mention here that I and people who work with me, we are not the only ones who look into this problem. There is a Mellon-funded project called EMOP, Early Modern Printing, that deals exclusively with the echo corpus of early English texts and applies Tesseract to it. And I have been a keen observer of their progress, but unfortunately they haven't yet published any measurements. So it remains to be seen what they have to contribute to this whole affair. Here I can only talk about my own work. Let's look at how typical printings look like. All of these samples are taken from the Bavarian State Library. If you look at them clockwise, beginning with the upper left corner, this is a 1564 printing of Thucydides' Peloponnesian War, and it had been translated from the ancient Greek to Latin by Lorenzo Valla, much earlier, of course, and reprinted ever since. So this is a 16th century printing. You see this Oratio Pericles Funebris, the famous funeral oration of Pericles at the end of the first year. And then to the right, there is actually what is called an incunabulum, one printing of the first 50 years of printing history, 1487, Foresti. This is a chronica, so a more or less annual description of things that have gone on in the world. On the lower left, you see 1577. It's a German description of herbals and their use for certain illnesses. And on the right, an 18th century printing where you see the mixture of script. What's written in German has a Gothic script, it's Fraktur, and anything else that's written in Latin has the Antiqua letters, posing another problem for correct recognition of the character types. And there are further problems as well. We already talked about the long S. You see here the Nescio. It's not Nefcio, but Nescio. I don't know what it literally means. Then you have these historical ligatures, which have long since gone out of use. I circled one. It's an AE. Polytonic Greek words show up in the middle of otherwise Latin characters. You have all these diacritics and you have historical spellings. Especially the last case is a very hard thing. If you think about post-correcting, you need a lexicon, but you normally don't have a lexicon of period spellings. You have a modern lexicon. And the historical spelling has also changed over time. So what do? The only thing you can do is draft up some rules by which words may have changed either from historical spellings to their modern spellings or the other way around, and try to match that. So there are several such methods in use. I will talk about some of them later during this talk. But for now, we have to live with the case that historical orthography didn't even exist because there was no fixed body of knowledge. The word should be spelled like this. It was just all use, and the use changed over time. Here is a typical page. It's taken from a Latin book much in use in the 16th century. It's Progenasmata Latinitatis by a Jesuit, a Bavarian Jesuit who wrote dialogues up to teach his pupils proper Latin of the time. And if you now take some of the available OCR engines, that is FineReader in its 11th edition, Tesseract and Octopus, and apply them without further training or anything else, you see what you usually get is something like 85% correct characters. This is a rule of thumb which holds true over an astonishingly vast array of printings and centuries. Actually, FineReader gets it quite well compared to the other two engines, but it comes as a price because FineReader can't be tweaked a lot. So that's what you get, and you have to live with it. If that's not good enough, or if it's even more cumbersome to correct the output than to transcribe it from scratch, OCR will not help you at all in this case. And that is more or less how it looks like today. So our hope is that perhaps we can tweak Tesseract and Octopus because they are open source, so they can in principle be inspected and the routines can be tweaked and whatever to the material at hand, and perhaps we can make some progress. That was more or less, with regard to historical printings, the state of the art of a year ago. And whatever I can tell you now is progress that has recently been made in the course of 1 year's time. So I will specifically focus now on this monstrum marinum, a sea monster, Octopus. I think it was named after an octopus which has 8 feet and is able to lift whole vessels here, as you see. But no fear need be had about this monster. We can use it for our purposes. Here we have the previously shown printing of Adam von Bodenstein. You see a typical page on the left. This is the original page. And I compare two outputs. One is Abby, and you already see it's, again, this quoted 85% correct character recognition. If you look closer, you also see, okay, he was able to correctly recognize the long S as an S. That comes out okay, because it has a specially trained module able to recognize Fraktur or Gothic script that's available for a few years. And it also uses some kind of historical lexicon. But the most problematic character is the blank. Why? If you look at the printing, you see that sometimes the words get very narrowly squashed together just to enable a correct right margin on the printing. This was an ancient ideal to have these right aligned margins in printing, no matter what it took with regard to the interword spaces. So sometimes you just can make up single words by looking at it because you know them, but the machine wouldn't know them. And you saw in the Abby output, you see that sometimes a complete line consists of a single string of characters. So this is the most problematic character in historical printings. And it's very hard to get these run-together words dissected again, because then you would need where one word ends, where one word starts, and all this with the historical spelling, it's almost hopeless. A much better result you can get if you train Octopus, which I did, and just from the beginning, you are not at 85% plus a progress of a few percentage points, but you almost immediately go up to 98, 99% correctly recognized characters. And how that is possible, and this is done in contrast to Abby without any lexicon, and it doesn't know about any of the words. That I will explain in the slides, in the following slides. So I think this gives us very good hope that this might be a way by which we could extract these very old printings. Of course, the next problem then will come up, how to search in this text. So we have to do some kind of normalization as well, but at least you get all the words. There are only a handful of errors remaining. In red, there are some substitutions, and then there in blue, there is one blank missing in the middle, and at the end, there are two words are split, which shouldn't be split, but otherwise it comes out quite well. By the way, if you want to look into all of the examples I gave you here, there are links at the footer. If you click at these links, I can make this presentation available to all of you. You will be led directly to the images at the holding institutions. So what is all this about? So previous OCR engines were all template-based. That is, they had an idea of how a certain letter looked like, and then they measured the similarity of a printed letter with its template. And if this similarity was high enough, this printed letter was deemed to be just the letter. That's the reason also why the long S comes out as an F, because no other letter is so similar to it. And a completely other and different approach was taken based on neural networks. And they have done marvelous things in pattern recognition tasks over the last years. The theory and the practice behind it comes primarily from a group in Switzerland, also from two Germans based originally here in Munich, Hochreiter and Schmidhuber. And Tom Broyle, this Google guy who invented the Octopus system, was 20 years ago, was also with their group and tried to apply their methods for the case of OCR. So what you have is a learning system, and it has several layers. The first layer is the input layer. It just looks at pixel values. Imagine you have a page consisting of 30 lines of text, and each line of text consists of black and white pixels, and you feed these pixel values into the network. It's normal for us as humans to think of letters as the most basic constituents of written language, but it need not be so. We could also over-segment the letters, and that is what the system does. In a line which contains perhaps 30 or 40 letters, a single line of text, you could cut it up into 500 or even 1,000 slices. The good thing about this is this over-segmentation. You get all the possible letter combinations, and you get all the ligatures and all the accents and what else. And after having seen these slices and compared it with ground truth, with the meaning of the whole thing, the machine is able to classify it into classes that correspond to glyphs. And the glyphs correspond to letters or special letter shapes. I will make this clear over the course over the next slides. Just keep this in mind. This is a self-learning system. So it relieves us of a lot of recognition, but burdens us, on the other hand, with the necessity to train it. So obviously, here's a trade-off involved, and we'll talk about that more. Then it has a memory layer. There are a certain number of memory blocks, so it learns what it has seen and is able to apply newly seen pages, hitherto unseen characters, and keep in memory what that means. And after it has seen enough of these single text lines, maybe you start with a few pages, 10 pages, and maybe each page has 30 lines. So in total, you have 300 lines, and you show these lines in random sequence to the network thousands of times, then at the end, the network has a pretty good idea of what's all about. It is able to convert not only the seen pages, which it has learned, but also unseen pages. That's the whole idea of this effort, and convert these pages into text. The thing is, you do not need any language model, and it can be trained on a lot of scripts. It's completely agnostic, but of course, a language model, what does it really mean, and where are the errors, comes into play at the end when you want to correct the remaining errors, because there are always some errors remaining. So look at this. I sliced already up a certain page. It's written in, I think, in the 17th century. It's an essay by Lord Bacon. What you need to do for each printed line, which is rather shallowly printed here, so not very well preserved, you have to prepare what is called ground truth. That comes from remote sensing, like you are directing radar rays to Venus, and because it's so cloudy you can't see what's on the ground. So you get an image, but the image is distorted from the cloud. And what's really on the ground, that's the ground truth, and that's what we have to transcribe here in a diplomatical way. Diplomatical here in the sense of exactly each letter as it looks like. And if it's a misprint, you have to transcribe the misprint as well. That can be done in a browser. So all this is written up in a 24-page tutorial I wrote, and the link will be shown at the end of this presentation. So you can download all this stuff and all the software plus the tutorial and try it out. Train your own models and see how good it works for yourself. So what you build up over a course of time is a repository of line images which get binarized, maybe in PNG format, which I recommend, plus a corresponding repository of ground truth files. These are just UTF-8 text files corresponding in exactly this diplomatical way to the line images. And then you are going to feed this to the neural network and let it learn from it. This is shown on the next slide. So this is a fairly intricate slide. Let's just talk about it line by line. The most prominent line at the top is one line of text as it appears on a page, here with inverted colors. And above it, maybe you cannot read it very well, is just the electronic representation, the ground truth. So what you show to the network is the printed line, what you equally show it to it, what it should mean. And now it begins to adjust its weights and trying to produce an output from the input which closely matches the prescribed ground truth. The next displays these rectangles in black with some white sprinkles in it is the actual output of the neural network. You see there a vertical axis ranging from 0 to about 150. These can be thought of as the single glyph classes. So the first 0 to 20 are perhaps the numbers plus some special signs, parentheses. Then come the lowercase and uppercase characters, some other characters, etc. So for each position is over the horizontal line, the network indicates this must be this special character. And I guess that's what should be printed there. And for you that's easier for you to see. Over each rectangle is also written the output in a decoded form again as text, and you see it pretty much gives what is written in ground truth. So this is already well-converged network, which is also shown in the lowest two panels, where you have these blue and green rectangular shapes. Each of these rectangular shapes is a posterior probability, as it's called. So the probability that this is a specific character. The green ones, by the way, correspond to interword spaces, because these are learned first, and the others just correspond to single letters within the words. The lowest panel then shows the progress in training the error. It goes down very quickly, and then it's just statistical noise after some time at a very well converged state. So if this is kind of magic to you, rest assured it is even for the people who invented the method. Neural networks are specifically difficult to understand, but somehow they managed to get there. And even if it takes some hours or even days to train a network, it's not our time, it's machine time, so we can afford it. This is an example of the Valla printing, 16th century Thucydides. And this is now not the ground truth, but the output of the network compared to the original printed lines. And the question is, can you spot the errors? And by the way, the average accuracy on unseen test pages, not on trained pages, but on unseen test pages, is well over 98%. I guess this is a somewhat unusual example, because in these 6 to 7 lines, I do not seem to see any error. So you see, you get this out, and this is already quite helpful if you want to equip yourself with a text from such an early printing. So here's another example, the case of the 18th century, where we have both Fraktur or Gothic script mixed with Antiqua script, also with italics in between. You just presented enough material of each sort of script, and you see the machine is able to get out the more or less, with a high degree, the right characters. By the way, are you still hearing me? I don't get any feedback. I hope we are still connected.
We are, sorry, we're muted.
Okay, fine.
Create disruptive noise.
Good. So having come thus far, you could, of course, then ask, so how well does it really work? Can we go back to the beginning, not of time, of course, but to the beginning of printing? That would be the incunabular period. Can we go back to the first 50 years of printing history? This period has a special meaning for us humanists, because when printing was first invented, everybody rushed to the printing press and thought they had the best that should be made more widely available, from the Bible to treatises on how to torture witches and whatever. So the best and the worst came to be printed. And just a few years ago, in 2009, there was an overview article on the state of Latin incunabula and whether they could be OCR'd. And the argument was made, we have all these special glyphs representing abbreviations, because this is the first printing period that directly followed on the manuscript tradition, where you employed all these abbreviations for sake of speed, for sake of saving paper, which was costly. And it was said, because of the prevalence of these glyphs, incunabula cannot be processed using OCR software. Commercial OCR programs produce almost no recognizable character strings, let alone searchable text. Other methods must be explored. So one of such another method is just the application of neural networks to the OCR problem. So let's look like what they give us when we apply them to an incunabulum. Here I have one that is Vincent of Beauvais. That was a Dominican monk of the 13th century. He was contemporary to Albertus Magnus, so all of his big encyclopedia was handwritten, and because it was so famous, it got printed as well later. The Speculum Naturale, it's actually, these are 4 massive tomes, and I just trained a few pages because I had to ground truth and transcribe them before, and that's what you get. It was just trained on 13 pages and then applied to another 4 pages. You get 98% accuracy. That's the output is what you get here on the right side. So I conclude that we can make some big progress even with Incunabula, but is this searchable text or not? That's more interesting because now it contains, of course, also all these special signs, and we need to find a way to expand them. Otherwise, you wouldn't find them. And sometimes you have such a diverse method of abbreviating words just to make the correct right margin and justification, just as before with the blanks between the words. But I see that we are now able to getting the text out of it without a very meticulous transcription by hand. Now we should look at it from a more systematic perspective, and I'm glad that I found an open source corpus of diplomatically transcribed text at Humboldt University, Berlin. And Anke Lüdling, who is there the corpus linguist, built up with a Google grant with students' help in the last years, a corpus spanning over 400 years of German herbal texts. So I could take the images of these texts and the existing transcriptions, trained a model for each of the books, let the model run, and then compare the model output and the accuracy on test pages. And what I thought that I would see, which was reasonable to expect, the older the book, the worse the output. But that's not the case, as you see. What you rather see is, in every century, you have good and well-preserved images, which give very good and very narrow recognition results. The accuracy doesn't really change a lot between the test pages, and maybe the errors are at the 1% level. On the other hand, there are, of course, also less well-preserved specimens where you have a slightly larger error margin, and also from page to page, the result is a little more uneven. But you see, all in all, if you say something below 5% error is high accuracy, you get high accuracy OCR over the complete printing history. So this means it can be done. It can even be done today. The problems are on some other front, and we have to talk about that in a minute. So what was thought to be impossible just a few years ago now becomes possible. And the problem is about how do we organize the effort to recover these data? Because now it becomes something that is collaborative in nature. It does not suffice to pay a lot of money to, I don't know, a lot of transcribers, make a economical or less economical, it depends on your view, package out of it and sell it commercially. It has been done in the past by the pioneers in this field, but now it becomes more a kind of scholarly collaboration and maybe even a kind of citizen science-ship. This is our own, and all of our printed history, we should make this available. And rather than everybody training their own models, shouldn't we have some centralized repository where everybody can train their models, make it available, and get the text out of it from the training, and the model is there, sitting there to be used by other people, to be improved by other people. That would be a great thing. And the better the data get, the more valuable they become. What's more here of a problem is not the machine time, but it's the organization behind it, and also perhaps the areas which are not so well covered automatically. And these are document image analysis, like what constitutes a pure text compared to a critical apparatus, or maybe marginal notations. And all this stuff has to be automatically or semi-automatically divided up into text space and non-text space. Here we have another barrier that needs to be broken down, but the original barrier of recognizing single glyphs has now really diminished. Another case is, what about the training effort? Because in order to have a model, we need to train it, and in order to train it, we need to have some ground truth. So I made some experiments with the Bodenstein result. Of course, what you haven't seen in a few pages, let's say we start with just 3 transcribed pages, any letters that aren't there will not be able to be recognized later. So you can imagine from the start that you get better if you add more pages. But already with 3 pages and then applied to a training set of 10 pages, you see you are just below 6%. Compare this with the ABBY output of 85% accuracy, that is 15% errors. So just with a model transcribed from 3 pages, you are 3 times better than ABBY. You have only a third of the errors. And then if you go to 6, 9, and 15 pages, the average accuracy goes up, or the residual error goes down, which is the same. And then it somehow levels out. And if you really want to add a lot of pages, like this last one, 30 pages, the mean residual error is not going down further, because it happens that there are some badly legible characters on every page. Rather, the variation goes down. But that helps as well, because you have more uniform results over a lot of pages. And then the next thing that comes after that, if you say, okay, 98% of accuracy is maybe good, or it's maybe not so good, it depends on what you want to do with the text, how can we find the remaining errors? Do we have to read from the beginning to the end of the whole book and inspect every single letter? Or can we use other more sophisticated methods as well? It turns out that we can. If you have a big lexicon and you have some ideas about what constitutes correct letter sequences and whatnot, you can do a semi-automatic method. This was done here at our university in the course of this Impact EU project I talked about earlier. It's called POCOTO for Post-Correction Tool, not a very imaginative name, but it works by calculating a whole series of similar looking errors. Like here, all of these S's the long S's have been recognized as an F. And there is nothing like Posthack in the lexicon, but there's a Posthack. So it just offers them to you for inspection. You can click all of them or just some of them and say correct them in one wash, in one go. In the lower left corner of this picture, you see error series ordered according to the number of occurrences. So in this case, you can tackle the most frequent errors and maybe bring down the accuracy, or bring up the accuracy in the most efficient manner. And we recently got a grant to make this a stable tool for the community. So this is also a very good thing, especially if we can use it also for Latin, Greek, and other languages. And then, why do we do all this? Let's look at the use cases here, just some ideas. Others have other ideas. For searching, if you look for getting a certain proof that this word or this phrase existed, it might already be good enough if you just have 98% accuracy. Or if you look for certain key concepts like justitia, we would like to have something, you find all the word forms. So you build all the word forms and you also find justitiam, justitiae, etc. But also if it's spelled with a J instead of an I, because of the historical spelling, and also if it's spelled in the OCR output with an F instead of an S, because it's an OCR error. Now you would highlight the findings in the image so you can quickly see whether this is a real hit or not. If you're looking for positive phrases you're looking for and you have found one, you are happy. That might already be enough. But other things can be done as well. You could look after named entities, what they are called, like things like names, places, institutions, and you want to say, see what a certain historical person has done and how this has reflected in the printed literature of the time. So you just have a big corpus and input his name, and you get all the places where this person has been in print, and you find interesting documents you would never have found otherwise. Or you look at intertextuality, how the texts talk to each other by referencing ideas, by citing ideas one from the other, etc. Or you provide a reading environment by which you can click on a word, but not in the OCR output, just in the text, and you get the lexical entry. Because remember, the OCR output might always be a little bit noisy. If you look in the text, you will have a pretty good idea what it means because you have the context, and maybe it's the error rate in printing is not as high as the recognition error rate. That would be a nice idea as well. Or you can align editions, work that has been done at Carnegie Mellon and also at Northeastern University. You can build up a corpus of corresponding editions and see how they changed over time. And at the end, of course, you can use the OCR, if it's good enough, to make a new edition and just correct the remaining errors. If the quality is good enough from the start, it will save you time compared to just manual transcription. So these are ideas that are there to be explored. And these are the direction I'm going now with my work, because the principle has been shown, it can be done and it should be done. Now it's more a question of how we organize it, that it can be applied on a big scale. So on this last page, I linked some of the software and also work we have done in Munich. I already said there is a tutorial of 24 pages, which a very detailed account, how to use this software, how to build your own models, what are the things to watch out for, and how can you get the most out of your own efforts. And thank you very much. Maybe we can discuss some of the issues I brought about. Thank you.
Well, that was it's like watching the Red Sox win a baseball game, which is both pleasurable and rare in terms of its impact, or rather a well-pitched game, I should say. Thank you very much, Uwe. That was, as someone who knows your work pretty well, that was even exceeded my high expectations in terms of clarity and interest. We have now. Are there ways for us to collect questions other than David Smith? If anyone else has questions, I will say. And while I'm looking around for our online participants, I'll ask: what are your thoughts on, say, just taking some of the books, 300,000 digitized German books, or books from HathiTrust or archive.org, and building a sort of digital humanities seminar around it where the students learn everything. They take a book and they have to train the OCR engine And then they have to apply all these various methods, text for use, social network analysis, and so on, while improving the text and produce editions. And I don't know, what do you think about that in terms of the feasibility of that as something to support in a pedagogical context for 10 or 15 humanist students?
Well, I think we should go for it. Actually, it would be very nice if we had some kind of collaborative web environment where anybody could send their images or link existing images to, transcribe a few pages, train a model, get the output, and then correct the output to train a little further. So if we had this, we could use this not only for pedagogical purposes, but every scholar could use this for his or her own research purposes, plus the public at large, the citizen science. The scientists could use it as well. So I think this is a high priority that should be funded by somebody.
Yeah, I'm thinking that so in a pragmatic sense, and anyone listening within the appropriate time frame, you can consider this to be an advertisement, but we're looking to teach courses in digital humanities at Tufts and Leipzig, but do them in sort of an overlapping sequence. So the Tufts class starts in January, and then when Leipzig comes online in April, the Tufts students deliver their presentations with the idea of helping to educate or fire up the next bunch of students who would then learn from the Tufts students in their presentations as they get up to speed, and then they would carry it forward. So you would have potentially a space going from January through mid-July, so quite a long stretch. You could really turn it if you ramped it up in the winter semester in Germany and did the same thing, and the German students trained the American students who then trained the next set of German students, you could have like the sun never setting on the digital humanities curriculum. But I really like this idea of pulling together various people with the idea that we're all creating digital editions. I think that you start with producing actionable data over which you can compute. Immediately you can start to apply these various services, and you're simultaneously comparing your particular books. You could have trained the font for a whole book series. So your set of materials against everything else that's available. And so what you're looking at is this human-machine symbiont or cybernetic entity that is getting smarter and smarter. And I think that's really what we want to strive towards.
Yeah, somebody has to make the beginning and begin the bootstrapping process. And as the more good text we have, the bigger becomes the historical lexicon, because we uncover all these word tokens.
Okay, so I think we're making good progress. I think on our end, the Perseids work is really pretty astonishing right now. It's coming together nicely. And there's a lot of work to be done. A hope I have is we're really starting a conversation both with Clarin and with the TextGrid / Daria people. And TextGrid has a lot of stuff that it does. It's not, there are some things it doesn't do that we do. There's some things it does do. There are some things it needs to learn how to do, and I think it may be the 2009 TextGrid may be time due to be reinvented, and that's a case we have to help to articulate to the BMBF. But I think there's a lot of these pieces sitting around, and we're at a threshold to get that infrastructure, and the question is how to coordinate what's going on and focus our resources. But I think what you've done has been to pull together, to show one thread through this. Now, and obviously this is complementary to what David Smith is doing also. So there's a lot of these strands which are converging.
Are there any more questions from remote participants or from participants in the room? Nope. Then thank you so much, Uwe, for a wonderful talk. And oh, wait. Is there a question?
Well, David's got that sort of prompt saying, I'm typing something.
Pizza Hut stuffed crust.
Dumb.
Right then, Pizza Hut brought me back, although with the original price. Just $9.99.
1 second, Uwe, I'm going to mute us while Greg's trying to pull up.
No, channel.
Oh, okay.
How quickly do trained models degrade on different books?
Right?
And we do not endorse or receive support from Pizza Hut.
Or stuffed crust.
Or stuff that sounds pretty good, and maybe they should send us some free pizzas for the free airtime we just got. Sorry, Germany. Actually, Germany has Pizza Huts too.
Everybody has.
It's time to put that mute back on. And
Hello? Uwe?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, great. Okay.
So
And you caught the question from David?
No.
Oh, I think you need to come a little bit closer.
okay, so two questions. First, how quickly do trained models degrade on different books? Second question, could you cluster books with slightly similar typefaces?
The second question first. Yes, David, you can. Although you lose a little bit of so the last maybe 1% or so in accuracy, but you can cluster. That's a good thing, because otherwise you would have to train each book anew. So my hope is, if you get more and more training material, we can try this out and build large islands of similar looking typefaces and start from there. And always you can train, if the result is not perfect, you can always train a little more specific after you have corrected the output and do a more specific model. But my hope is that you can get large parts of the typeface landscape in this way. So your first question was something about the model for a single book?
So what was that again?
But the first question was more about a model for a single book?
It is, the first question was, how quickly do trained models degrade on different books? And I'm not sure I really understand that question myself.
So one interpretation would be, I trained a model on a certain typeface for some book, and quickly means the further you go away from that typeface, or something like that, yeah. So the worst case is you train a book on an Antiqua typeface and try to apply it to Fraktur. That's very worse. You really don't get anything out of it. So the general answer is, the closer the typeface looks, the better the result.
And in fact, that it does answer, his question is indeed answered. I just get here through this, our interesting daisy chain of communication techniques here. Other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much, Uwe.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Uwe.
So much of that is